And now, I'd like to begin the candidate introductions with first Dr. Art Anderson.
Thank you very much, everyone. And I have to remind myself a little bit of Jerry's initial humor. Humor always is good to break the ice, and so it's like what one strawberry said to the other, and that is that we wouldn't be in this jam if we weren't in the same bed together. But anyway, my background is that I grew up on a small dairy farm in Michigan, and we milked about 30 to 34 cows. Initially, those were with surge buckets, for those of you that are old enough to remember those, as well as I was involved in having to bale hay, and those are the little square bales. I know what pitch and manure is with a pitchfork. I know what building a fence is with hand fence postal diggers. And then subsequently went on to the university and got a degree from University of Arizona in ag education, and decided I was going to teach vocational agriculture. And then got into agriculture consulting, and part of that was because I saw that the standard agriculture system was not working. It wasn't working on our area, and it's not working around the world. And so I decided that we needed to do something different, and I sought out teachers that could help me with that, and actually got into agriculture consulting. I was also an exchange student in the Netherlands, so I saw what went on in other countries as far as agriculture was concerned. And then finally, I, at age 34, decided to go to medical school and became a physician. So I understood how to connect that whole issue from the farm all the way through to human health. And then I decided I still want to be in the Air Force, so I became a flight doc, and I'm a colonel in the Air Force Reserves. And as a military officer, I understand what it takes in order to get people motivated to do their best. And as such, I also understand how important education is in order to help people to get to that point. And the reason that I decided to run for governor is I'm just tired of all the standard politics, because nothing's getting done. And so I have the background in all of the areas in order to be able to get something done. And I appreciate your support, and thank you for being here today.
Jack.
Hi, I'm Jack Ferguson, and I'm running to be the next governor of the state of Kansas. You know, a lot of people sometimes they look at my candidacy and say, you know, this is a joke, you know, this kid, what does he think he's doing? But, you know, I think I'm running because I believe there is a serious, one of the main issues in the state and in this country is that the youth, they seem apathetic because they think all politicians are the same, Democrats and Republicans are the same thing. What are they fighting for? And I think, you know, showing everyone, not just young people, but everyone, that really that the progressive way, the democratic way is the way forward, and that there is a reason to get involved, and that getting involved can change things. And I think that is the real motivator behind my campaign. But I think we also have to look at, you know, how things are going, how we move forward. And I believe we have to go, you know, I think the vision of Bernie Sanders, you know, has been a great inspiration to my campaign. You know, we have to look past maybe some disagreements about certain policies, but uniting to fight, you know, to fight the establishment, and to fight, you know, the powers that be that want to keep people in the dark. We need to move forward, and that's why I'm running for governor. Thank you. I guess you got your own.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Ward. I'm the Democratic leader of the Kansas House, and I'm running for governor. Before I get started, I want to thank Jerry and the Thomas County Democrats that did a fabulous job setting this up and getting all of us here to talk about the future of Kansas. Thank you, Jerry. I also want to introduce the state party chair, John Gibson, sitting down here in the front row, and Ethan Corson, who's the executive director. Raise your hand. And you say, why are you doing that? It's your time. I want to make it perfectly clear that Democrats are competing for votes in every corner of this state. We're recruiting candidates for the House everywhere. An award for governor campaign is not going to let any corner of this state go untouched for voting for me. We are going to build an economy in this state in the next 4 years that works for everyone, not just the rich corporations. We're going to have a health care system that a person isn't afraid to go to the doctor because they can't afford it. We're going to expand Medicaid, and we're going to do it this year, and we're certainly going to do it in the Ward administration. And finally, about schools. It is critical that every child, regardless of where they live, how rich their parents are, how rich the neighborhood they live in, has an opportunity to pursue their God-given talents. And we have a duty and a responsibility as the state of Kansas to give teachers the tools they need to teach those children, and we're going to get it done this year. And as governor, we're going to protect that school system. The next thing that's critical for the future of Kansas is a partnership in business between community colleges and technical colleges and job training and their governor, so that we continue to build high-quality jobs that our children and our grandchildren want to live in Kansas and build their future. With Jim Ward as governor, that will be the future of Kansas. We will move forward. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Laura Kelly, and I'm glad to see all of you here this afternoon. I'm really here to tell you a little bit about myself and also to give you a picture of what I see on the Kansas horizon. I grew up in a military family. As a child, I lived in Asia, I lived in Europe, and I lived all across the United States, from West Coast to East Coast and in the Midwest. When I married and I started my own family, I really had this strong urge to provide roots for my family and my daughters. My husband and I talked about it long and hard about where that might be. And when it was all said and done, we decided that we wanted to create our life and raise our daughters here in Kansas. We chose Kansas because of the great opportunities that it afforded us at the time. There were good jobs, there were great schools, and there was this real sense of community that I yearned for as a military brat. The opportunities and the education afforded to my two daughters really has been a result of good leadership that we had at the state capitol for so many years. And it had made them into the vibrant, strong women that they are today. The education and the opportunities that our students now get will chart their path and their futures and our state's future. So that's why I'm running. I want to be governor because I want to help put Kansas back together again. So I'm sitting here looking out thinking, what do we need to do that? One, we do need to make schools our top priority. Kansans always have. That's fallen behind lately. We need to bring that back. And I'm running out of time, so I want to say I look forward to talking with all of you later if you've got some questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Josh Biswati. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank the Thomas County Democrats for hosting this event. The last time I was with you, Thomas County Democrats, I got sick on the tilt-a-whirl at the county fair because the guy running it was so nice. He gave us a nice long ride for my children and I, but I've gotten old enough where I couldn't handle it very well. But it's great to be back. It's great to be here in the Fromm Theater, particularly with the family that has done so much for Thomas County and Northwest Kansas. The namesake of this building in this space. Most of you know I grew up on a farm just south of Ellsworth, Kansas. I still farm there. I moved to the base of my own operations. My wife and I spend most of our time now in Topeka, Kansas, but I couldn't let go of the farm. My family has been farming in that county for 150 years. Any of you that drove out today on I-70 would have passed the original home site, which is only about a mile south of Interstate 70, right off of the highway. So we have strong roots in central Kansas, but also those roots in a family that's been here a long time extend all the way out here to Northwest Kansas, so it's great to be here. A couple things I want to talk about. This is an auspicious day for us to have this event. The federal government is officially shut down. And it's shut down in part because of gross impasse, and that's something that I think we've seen now repeatedly. We come to the precipice at the federal level. We see something similar at the state level. The state can't really shut down the same way the federal government can, but I think we all recognize that our politics are very divided. And both parties have sort of retreated to their home bases and refused to work with each other. And I think that it's imperative as a candidate to bridge that divide again, which is why I've spent so much time in Western Kansas, and which is why after the last filing period, I'm the candidate that has received the most contributions from Western Kansas, more so than any of the Republicans, which is pretty extraordinary when you think about it for a Democrat. So it's great to be here. I'm out of time as well and look forward to the rest of the afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Klingenberg, and I am a salesman from Salina, Kansas. I'm a lifelong Salina native. Born technically in Missouri, but brought so early on, I don't know any other place. I've always lived in Salina. A very common question I get is, why do you want to be governor? Why did you decide to run? It is true, I've never been in politics before. But my answer to that was, at first, I want to help people. Nothing more, nothing less. But then it gets more complicated. I started looking at what was happening in both the state and federal level. And then I got angry. And a lot of people are angry. But anger won't get us anywhere. So I decided to enter politics. And then I decided to shoot straight for the top. Because I have often liked the quote, if people aren't laughing, your dreams aren't big enough. And that's what I go for. I think I would be the best possible candidate for governor because I believe that I can bring people together. I'm an outsider, never been in politics. People would be willing to work and make deals with me. I also hold many progressive values, progressive tax systems, being able to make deals to bring jobs back to the state. But I also have a capacity to learn. I'm driven by facts, rationale. If I make a terrible idea, I want to be called out. I want to listen. I want to hear what the people of Kansas have to say. And I want to make my decisions accordingly. Thank you.
We will now begin our questions. Each candidate has 2 minutes to comment. We're going to go move left, and then after we're finished, there will be a 1-minute follow-up for all candidates. This question is posed to all candidates, and it comes from a number of citizens from Atwood, Kansas, here in Colby, as well as one in Oakley, Kansas. The question is this: a recent budget analysis developed by the Kansas Legislative Research Department, factoring in Governor Brownback's recent budgetary recommendations, have an ending balance next year on June 30th, 2019 of only $150 million, and puts the state deeper into debt in 2020 and 2021. The question specifically, first for Arden, specifically, what are you proposing that will bring back the budgetary surpluses the state operated on during past Democratic governors?
That's a good question, and certainly it is a question that most everybody has, and I think every state has that question, really, or every citizen in every state, because there are several states in the country that have a problem with deficit spending. And I was taking a look at Minnesota the other day, and it's interesting how the current governor in Minnesota, much like opposite the current one we have here, he inherited a deficit, and now 4 or 5 years in a row, they've had $1.5 to $2 billion excesses. And the one thing that he said he focused on was education. And I think we have to look at a long-term approach to solving any kind of budget issue. And part of that budget solving issue is we got to get more revenue to the state. You say, well, yeah, that's pretty obvious. Yes, but you get more revenue to a state through business, through economy. And the way you allow that to happen is focus on education, so you have a better skilled labor force, so that we have interest of businesses coming to the state. As such, then, we have more revenue to tap into. And certainly we need to look at additional revenue sources. That's the bottom line. We all like a civil society, and in order to have a civil society, we have to have public services. And the bottom line is we have to pay for those public services. So we're going to have to go back and look at additional revenue, and we're going to have to get that additional revenue from those that are best capable of actually paying that. Yes, that's going to be some of your large corporations, that's going to be some of your businesses, and that's just the reality. It doesn't matter which state you go to. If you want to have roads and services and education and a civil society, you have to pay for it. That's all there is to it. And believe me, you're going to pay for it one way or the other. If we don't pay for it up front, we're going to pay for it on the other end, and more crime, in having to build more prisons, as well as then more medical problems.
Well, I think it's obvious that we're probably going to have to, look at. I think there is one proposal that Kansas is. I think people need to be more open to, and we need to look at this. In the state of Colorado, legalizing marijuana has been a great boon to the state budget and the economy. Millions of dollars in education every year for the state budget comes from the legalization of recreational marijuana. Regardless of what you think of it morally, I think it's a very interesting idea in terms of legalizing it in order to help fund our education system and our general budget at large. Because with that extra money coming, it's not increasing an extra tax. It's just simply we're going to allow the sale of something. We put a recreational tax on it. Maybe higher than the normal sales tax. But it brings in millions of dollars in revenue in the state where it's legal. In California, they just legalized it. They're estimating $1 billion of annual revenue. Of course, Kansas wouldn't be that high. But, we could end up getting, $100 million a year. That's just a guess. No one can see the numbers on that. I'm just thinking. But I think that number, if we were to see an increase like that in the state, if we were to legalize it, I think that could be a great way to help the state economy, besides just raising taxes in general.
Governor Brownback has been the worst fiscal manager in the history of our state. Just a year ago, I want to put you back just 1 year ago, we would just finish 3 credit downgrades. Our debt has almost doubled. And every month you read in the paper that revenues, money to pay the bills was always less and less. And every time we came back to Topeka, there was a huge hole or deficit that had to be addressed. As you know, and as you do in your businesses and in your local communities, you know this simple rule that you probably learned in kindergarten. Kansas works better when we work together. And last year, after a historic election where we flipped 13 seats in the Kansas House from conservative Republicans to Democrats, we were able to put together a bipartisan coalition that took significant steps to reverse that fiscal crisis. And we reversed a lot of the Brownback tax experiment. We asked those 330,000 wealthy businesses in Kansas to return to the income tax rolls and pay their share of the common good. We rejected the idea that we would not have any income tax in Kansas. And as a result, while our ending balances aren't as robust as we would like, we have had 7 months where the money has exceeded the bills. The last month was almost $85 million. We are looking forward to a continued robust economy in Kansas, and we will continue to be fiscal stewards. The most important thing that a governor can be is fiscally responsible with your tax dollars and invest them in essential services. A Ward administration will continue to do that.
Thank you. I think Representative Ward has laid out what has happened to the state of Kansas over the past 7 years. We all know that when the 2012 tax cuts went into place, that they immediately drained $700 million from our state coffers. And that's on a $6 billion budget, so it was quite significant. Since that time, not only have we lowered our cash reserves, but we have robbed every piggy bank we had in the state. I think many people are aware that we have not funded our transportation program, which used to be the pride and joy of the state of Kansas, for several years. We have just swept all of that money. We dipped down into the Pool Money Investment Board, which is money that really is being held on behalf of our municipalities and the state government, and we borrowed money of that just to pay our bills. Our state debt is at a record level. In order to do some of the things that we ordinarily would have done with state general funds, we borrowed and we bonded. We have not funded our CAPERS program fully. We're not doing our fair share, expecting employees to do it, but the state itself has not made proper contributions. We did reverse part of the Brownback failed tax experiment last year, but we're still in trouble. We still have a long way to go with a lot of things that we need to do. I think we need to turn around and invest in the kinds of things that will grow Kansas, create jobs, and grow our economy, because that will then generate the kind of revenue that we need to fill the holes that have been created by our government.
Returning to this question of what can we do to make sure that we're solvent by 2020, I do think that the legislature made a significant lift in the last legislative session. Also, it is difficult to pass any tax package. It's difficult to arrive at 63 votes in the House and 21 votes in the Senate, and in this case they had to reach supermajorities in both cases, which is pretty remarkable. I think that the best thing may be to allow this to work for a while, because the other element to this is that the state had passed financially irresponsible tax policy right as two of the critical elements of the economy, ag and natural and oil and gas, plummeted, and we are probably at or near their neighbor. We will see them come back over the next couple of years, and so hopefully a combination of better tax policy plus an improving economy in those sectors that make a huge difference in Kansas will help us over the next few years. It is likely, they may not by 2020, and we have to revisit things. Although I would like to say, as a Democrat, if we do revisit the tax code, which it's difficult always to open that up, certainly to do something proactive about increasing revenues, but if we revisit it again, I would like us to certainly look at sales tax on food. Kansas has one of the most regressive in the country. It's one of the highest, and it's an opportunity for us to send a message to everybody in Kansas that we've given them a little bit of relief. I'm not naive to say that if you do that, you have opened up yet another hole in the budget and we would have to address it somewhere else. But I think that if we are required to reopen a conversation about tax policy in the state over the next few years, it needs to be the centerpiece, and it would certainly be a centerpiece of my action, to consider sales tax on food, either reducing it or eliminating it.
I think that fiscal responsibility should be priority number one entering post-election. A government, in my opinion, that is broke cannot reinvest into its people. That is the primary method of growth in the state, is the government willing to spend money back into its people for better opportunities. One of the things I would propose to do in the short term would be to return to a more progressive tax structure. It will be a difficult thing to do, but I do believe it is the correct path. At one point in time, I do believe Kansas used to have 5 or more tax brackets. This is what we should return to in order to shore up the budget and have the money and capability to reinvest into new programs. Things that we can also use to reduce our spending level on certain things. Things like drug treatment to keep people out of incarceration, reintegration programs to prevent us from spending more money than we have to into our criminal justice system. These are things that we should definitely look at coming forward, and then when the time comes around to review where our budget was, then we can begin to make cuts where needed. It is time to shore up, reinvest, and then we can go from there. Thank you.
I would like to reread the question for recent Mayor of Wichita, Kansas, Carl Brewer. Carl, the first question comes from a number of people from the community. A recent budget analysis developed by the Kansas Legislative Research Department, factoring in Governor Brownback's recent budgetary recommendations, have an ending balance next year on June 30, 2019 of only $150 million, and puts the state deeper in debt in 2020 and 2021. The question specifically, what are you proposing that will bring back the budgetary surpluses the state operated on during past Democratic governments?
Well, the first thing is first let me apologize for being late and getting here. I ended up taking the scenic route getting here. But the first thing I would do is to go through and to analyze exactly what we actually have that's actually out there and what is actually owed to the state itself. Certainly, various different tax abatements and things of that nature that we have that are outstanding, that various different companies or businesses have not paid in on. Go back and recapture those dollars that where they made those commitments that they would provide to various different jobs and various different incentives that we have given, and possibly create an environment where we had clawbacks and getting those particular dollars back. Then secondly, taking it a step farther and start looking and exploring new and different ways of being able to service our goods and find out what goods that we actually have in the state of Kansas that we can sell more of. And that's one of the things that we have taken a very aggressive approach to being able to do that, to shore up the budget. Will we be able to correct the problem that the Brownback administration has created during the last budgetary session? It's not going to happen in 1 year. But over a period of time, we can actually make gains and we can make those improvements and recapture those dollars and put us back into the black.
Now, all candidates are entitled to a 1-minute follow-up. I would like to start I'll look down the line here, Dr. Anderson, 1-minute follow-up, and then Jack, and Jim.
And that was on the same question, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The issue as well on the budget that really I don't see very many people covering, and that is how is the money actually spent? And yes, we have to get more revenue, as I said, but the thing that always comes up or frequently comes up, and I have heard this a lot, we just need to expand Medicaid. We just need to expand this, we need to expand that. Bottom line is that it is true, we need to extend Medicaid coverage to more people, but not with the current system, because the current system is so wasteful that throwing good money after bad does not achieve the outcome that we need. That money is valuable. It's public money. We have to maintain those kinds of things and look at actually how money is spent. That's one of the problems that we have with government, and that is once they establish a program, it really is never looked at very deeply as to, well, how efficient and effective is that program? Medicaid is one of those, one of many, but one of those that really needs to be overhauled before we extend it to more people.
Jack?
I would just like to say that I do support Mr. Swati's idea of eliminating the food sales tax, but I have thought of an idea that I thought might work in order to replace it. I think if we were to institute a luxury goods tax so that the people that can afford to pay more pay that, so the people that are working paycheck to paycheck don't have to pay that extra money.
Listen, the budget is the most important thing. Just a couple of basics about the budget. 50 cents of every dollar we spend in Kansas of your money goes to K-12 education. Last year, we did the right thing by expanding that for all-day kindergarten. And we also added at-risk 4-year-olds because the data showed us that had the best impact on the future of children. I think that's a good use of money. And as I've gone across the state, no one said, oh, stop spending money on schools. That is our prime directive and the most important. The next 20 to 23 cents is in higher ed. Places like Colby Community College, which is in the top 10 nationally, and it had a growth in enrollment last year. Those are good investments. What the problem is when you crater the revenue source, you tell a whole group of affluent, wealthy corporations they don't have to participate anymore. You get what happened in Kansas for the last 5 years. That is not going to happen under a Ward administration.
I've been intimately involved with the Kansas budget for all 14 years that I've been in the state legislature. I'm not going to sit here and make any promises that we can't keep. The fact of the matter is that we do have some very serious revenue problems. We solved some of them in the past session. There are more to go. And I think we're going to need to take a look at doing that by carefully evaluating our priorities. There are many. I think schools will be at the top of that list, but there are several others. I think people are aware our correction system is in disarray, our mental health system is in disarray, and our social service safety nets have been dismantled. We have a lot of work to do. It is not going to be easy. It's going to be very hard work. And we need a governor who can go into that office on day one and start solving the problems for the state of Kansas.
only other thing I would add to this is that the problem is so vast that it is going to be the top priority of any governor that takes office, but it's also going to have to be the top priority of the entire government. So the Senate and the House and the governor are going to be fully engaged on righting the ship. And that then becomes an issue for the Democrat that would potentially become governor, because they have to build a coalition government. The Senate's not going to change hands in this election cycle, and so it has to be a governor that can work with a Republican Senate and a House that hopefully becomes a lot more Democratic, but likely is going to remain a Republican House. And I would contend that coming from where I come from, having represented that area, and also having worked so hard in rural Kansas, I understand and can connect with people all across the state of Kansas, and I think that's going to be a necessity of the next governor, because the fiscal challenge is simply so great.
To me, I think the most challenging aspect of creating a fiscally responsible fiscal policy, is truthfully the compromise. One of the first quotes that I gave to a newspaper was, "I find that government in itself is lacking in compassion and compromise." There seems to be a distinct lack of ability to understand where other people are coming from. By compromising, you can take inches forward and eventually get to that spot. So a progressive tax policy is typically not supported by Republicans, but if I can show them this is why we need to do that, and then later we can work on a better program, that's where you get your real success from and inch your way forward. It will take time, but I think it can be done. And Kansas can be a beacon to neighboring states and the rest of the country.
You have a follow-up, you're allowed a follow-up to the question concerning the comment. Yes, again, concerning what you're proposing to bring back the budgetary surpluses the state operated on during the past Democratic government.
And as I was saying earlier, create an environment where it's a healthy environment, for businesses to expand and to grow inside the state of Kansas. But then secondly, taking it a step farther and holding corporate America accountable for their actions. And if they make various different commitments as to the number of jobs, the number of investments that they're going to be making in our communities, then they should make those. And the incentives that we actually provide, apply the dollar figures to them and recollect those dollar figures and those dollars back if they do not meet the demands of what the agreements that they actually put into place. When you start talking about incentives, and pay very close attention to when you're giving out the incentives, whether they're TIFs or IRBs or anything of that nature, because some of those are tax dollars that are used for education. And make sure that when you're disclosing this information, you have full disclosure to our educational system and also to the local community and what the total dollar figure is going to be of tax dollars that they will not be receiving if they agree to go ahead and make this type of a decision. But be very selective and get good quality businesses and investments that are inside the communities in the state of Kansas.
Well, our next question comes from a number of people in the community, several from Colby, one from Brewster, Kansas. A candidate has already touched on this. It may not take 2 minutes, but the question concerns what can we do to help our rural hospitals. The question is this, and I'd like to start with Jack. Jack, would you be in favor of the Medicaid expansion?
I think Medicaid expansion is vital, because the more people that we can cover, I think we cannot we have to make sure that the more people are covered, the better. Because if we cover less people can get covered, and people wait longer to go to the hospital, and then they can't afford it when they're not covered under insurance. Ultimately, I hope hopefully sometime in the future, the federal government enacts a nationalized healthcare system like in Canada. I think we need to go towards that, but I don't think that's right for the state, given our fiscal. Even though it would save the state money in the long run, I don't think the initial setup would be there. Would be for the state right now would not be a good thing. But we also need to, you're talking about. I'm just going to be more general on hospitals and stuff in general. I think, I was touched on this earlier with drug policy. I think, people, the opioid epidemic and, drug epidemic, if we were to legalize and have a tax revenue system, I would love to put some of that money toward education, but also put some of that money into rehab. So, so people can, a lot of people that they may want to go to rehab, but they can't afford it. Or if drugs are decriminalized, they may be not as afraid of prosecution, so they may be willing to go get help. So I think in terms of healthcare, I think that's something we really have to look for at the state level.
Yes, it is job one to expand Medicaid, and we don't wait till next year, we do it this year. I was privileged to introduce the first bill in Kansas to expand Medicaid, and I've introduced it every year since. I went from patronizing comments from my Republican colleagues that, oh, aren't you cute, we'll never vote on this, we'll never debate it, to 81 votes in the House last year and 25 in the Senate. And we're going to get those 2 votes in the Senate, those 3 in the House, and we're going to expand Medicaid because it's the right thing to do, not only for rural Kansas, but for urban Kansas. There are too many hospitals that are one bad month away from closing their doors. And we're talking 20, 25 hospitals, primarily in rural Kansas, but it hurts the urban centers too. But that's not all we can do. We have an opportunity to pass more, to loosen the restrictions on telemedicine. And that allows smaller communities to access experts and specialists in other areas. And the insurance companies are lining up against that and going to stop the doctors from getting paid. That's a way to tell who's on your side, because that directly impacts local rural Kansas primarily, but it also helps urban hospitals. The other thing we need to do is look at the practice of medicine and ensure we're using all the tools in the toolbox, like nurse practitioners and dental practitioners, to expand healthcare in areas where they're underserved. These are things that we don't always need new laws. We just need a governor in the bully pulpit promoting those kinds of healthcare policies that benefit the entire state, wherever you live.
I've been a strong advocate for Medicaid expansion since the opportunity presented itself. In the time that we have not expanded Medicaid, we have left well over $2 billion back in Washington, D.C. to be distributed to other states so they can take care of their folks. That needs to stop. We did get very close to overturning it last year. I'm sure that there will be an attempt to do that this year. And I hope that we can garner the extra 2 or 3 votes that we need in the respective chambers. The other things that we have done related to Medicaid over the past time, we privatized our Medicaid system so that we brought in 3 for-profit insurance companies from out of state to actually manage our Medicaid program. It's been a disaster, quite honestly. We have seen providers not being reimbursed for services. We have seen people with great need drop from services, because the only way that it can work for a for-profit company is to either provide less services or no services to make you money. So that, I think, is another imperative for the next governor, is to really look at what we've done in our entire Medicaid system, including Medicaid expansion, and figure out a way to do it better so we get better services at a better price to more Kansans.
First and foremost, these are our tax dollars anyway, and it's not like Washington, D.C. is going to sit them somewhere in a vault until Kansas asks for them again. They're going to spend them in another state. So it makes sense for us to take advantage of that program. And I think it speaks to a larger philosophy. As much as I do not like our current president of the United States, if he created a program that worked well for us here in Kansas, as governor, I would be willing to implement that program. Part of the reason that Medicaid is ground to a halt here is because of political reasons. They simply did not want to take part in anything that President Obama did or expanded, which is one of the ways that we find ourselves now with a federal government that's ground itself to a halt. I also think that on a health side, and I've toured a lot of rural hospitals, there are some ingenious things going on with some very well-run hospitals around the state, particularly in how they're attracting doctors. And I think we need to look at communities where that's successful, particularly Quinter in this kind of neck of the woods, and then Lakin down in southwest Kansas, and use what they're doing and try to apply it in some other hospitals around the state, because Having a doctor in that community is critical. It's not only critical for the hospital, but frankly, it's critical for the overall health of the community and its sense of pride. And so we have to have and make sure that programs are in place so that our hospitals can attract doctors first and foremost. And then finally, to the broader issue of health insurance, I think that the state ought to consider finding a way to pool collective risk for the people that are lost in the middle in the current healthcare system, and I'm one of those. I think the Affordable Care Act at the national level did a great job for lower-income Americans, and I think people that already have a system that's provided to them by their employers have a pretty good healthcare system. But those of us who self-insure, particularly farmers, have seen year-over-year premium increases on the order of 30% or higher. Over a 3-year period, my wife and I's health insurance has increased 105%. It's terrible, and the state ought to be working every day to improve that.
I'm in full support of an expansion of Medicaid. Getting it to as many people is a big priority for me. Yes, we do have an insurance system in the United States. We are required to have insurance. But insurance is not the same as health. When you have insurance, it doesn't mean you're going to have access to a doctor. That's what we really need to be focusing on. I do believe that Kansas, with the right fiscal policy, could potentially implement something similar to single payer and make it available to all Kansans, working class, lower middle, upper middle. We can make that happen, and together we will be stronger for it. One thing I would think, or I think that is an interesting topic, and I think the state should consider looking into what it could possibly do, is drug prices. It just makes no sense to me that a bag of saline water should cost $800 just because it's billed through an insurance carrier. It makes no sense. You have people raising the cost on certain drugs, life-saving drugs, for no reason other than profit. And it is often said there's no profit in helping the poor. But what are we here for if that's not what we're trying to do and elevate as many people out of that as possible? I have a good example myself. At one point in time, my wife was pre-diabetic. We needed test strips. Insurance covered the testing kit, but not the strips itself, to the sum of high double digits for one pack of strips. At the time, our income was limited. Nobody can afford that. So we need to do what we can as a state to keep the costs low on our people and make sure people are getting the care they need. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We'll get to 1 minute follow-ups. We have 2 minutes to answer the question.
My perspective, the answer to it is yes, I support expanding healthcare and Medicaid expansion. And the reason being because I believe that it is important that every citizen have an opportunity to have some form of health care. And sometimes circumstances are beyond our control as individuals. We can do all the right things in our lives and we can still run into challenges. But you're also going to have to be able to take care of them, and you're going to have to address that issue one way or another. And taking it a step further, when you start looking at rural communities, we need to start really reaching out. We've made some terrible mistakes here in the state of Kansas when they had federal dollars that were actually sent to the state of Kansas, and under the Brownback administration, these dollars were not accepted because it wasn't politically correct or anything of that nature. That's wrong. That's wrong in so many different ways because families in our communities and in rural communities end up suffering. We need to took those dollars, provide health care for every single citizen, and then not only taking it a step farther, but finding out ways to be able to recruit doctors to come to rural areas and provide very incentives to get them to come to those areas and for them to stay in those areas.
You'll get to a follow-up.
As a family practice doc, I deal with Medicaid every day. About a third of my patients are Medicaid and Medicare, SSI, SSDI, and I have to deal with that crappy system every single day in my practice. And for those people, it's easy for them to say, let's just expand that. They don't have to deal with it every day. Every day I have people come to me who need valuable medicines or therapies, only to have someone who has no medical background tell me, doctor, this is not medically necessary. And you want to expand that program? Why are we spending $8,700 per person? It's about a $3.3 billion program. We cover 370,000 people. If we overhaul the system, we can double the number of people that we cover, 750,000 people, without shorting them on any care that they are currently getting. Why would anybody not want to do something like that? I'll say more when I get my minute.
Thank you, Jack. It's now time for 1 minute follow-ups. We're going to go with Jack first.
Can we propose something? We were just going to suggest maybe we skip the
1 minute follow-up. We've seen a lot of questions come down, and I think for time's sake, it might be nice to have some more questions. If someone objects, that's fine.
Gentlemen, ladies. All right, here we go. Okay, here's our next question. It comes from a member of the Colby community. First, a quick statement. There are many non-citizens in western Kansas whose jobs are essential to the western Kansas economy. The question is this, and we will begin, let's see here, the question will go with Jim. Jim, what is your position on immigration reform as it relates to western Kansas, specifically DACA?
I've had the privilege to meet and talk with and see some incredible people. They're called immigrants who were brought here as a young child, 6 years or younger, and they only know one country, and in their heart they only know one national anthem, one pledge of allegiance. They're Americans. We should fix the law and make that the legal fact too. It is wrong, morally wrong to export or to send people back to countries they have no connection with. And I opposed the Trump administration. The day after it came out, I was in a rally at the Capitol, standing with those DACA dreamers. I've also had the privilege of voting for, particularly, now listen, I agree. I'm an old prosecutor. I believe in the rule of law. I respected some of these people came illegally. But these aren't the people who made the illegal decisions. These are children who were brought here, who have done nothing but play by the rules and done everything, make you proud if they were your child. And we should end the idea that these people have to live in the fear of deportation because of the president or the governor. And as governor, I would take that message to Washington because it's wrong.
I remember when I was running for the Senate the very first time in 2004. And the question I got at so many doors was, what are you going to do about our immigration policy? And at that time, the issue was really that in the state of Kansas, we were allowing children of illegal immigrants to pay state tuition at the rate. No scholarships, no nothing, just rack rate. And many people objected to that, thinking that we needed to punish them by either not letting them attend colleges or charging them out-of-state tuition. I opposed that then, and I continue to oppose any policies that punish those children who came here not of their own free will, but came with their parents. I also think it's economically stupid policy that we have at this particular point. I mean, when you look across the country, it's not just Kansas that depends upon imported employees. It's many of our states. And it's vital that government begin to work with our business community, the chambers of commerce, and develop and sponsor an immigration reform bill that will affect these DACA kids, but will also set up a system where we can attract foreigners who bring special talents to our field. And one of the other things that we've seen with the immigration policies that are being promoted on the federal level is that we're losing some of the best and brightest talent in our higher education system. They're either leaving because they no longer feel comfortable, or they're just not coming.
I was glad you gave that history, Senator Kelly. I was about to give you credit for helping us pass the in-state tuition for children. I thought you were there then, because I know Representative Ward and I were, and I'm glad you supported it. It was, I'd say, I don't want to speak for Representative Ward, but I think he would agree with me. It's one of our prouder moments, and it had a big impact, particularly even on community colleges. I know the young men and women that took advantage of that when we passed it, the in-state tuition for children of undocumented immigrants. Many of them ended up going to community colleges, probably quite a few of them here in Colby. It is an important element. The immigrant community is an important element of the economy in Kansas. It's especially important in the western third of the state of Kansas. I think the next governor sets, more than anything, a tone for the state of Kansas, and we need to set the tone that we are open and ready, because we've seen what can happen when communities embrace vibrant and diverse ethnicities, and Garden City is sort of ground zero for that. There's all sorts of exciting things going on there, because I think everyone in the community realized that the entire city rises when they embrace the diverse economy that they have there, but that only works when the immigrant community is comfortable here and believes that they have a government that is trying to work with them. I also know that there are a lot of large farms throughout western Kansas that take part and use complicated H-2B visa programs to get the work that they need. And they have come to me and said, more than anything, just make sure we all want to follow the law. The people that come and work here want to follow the law, but we need to make sure that the laws are as less complicated as possible, least complicated as possible. And that's incumbent upon us as government and as leadership to make sure that's the case, because our economy depends on it, and the economy here in Northwest Kansas certainly depends on it.
On the subject of immigration, and immigration as it pertains to Kansas, I'm a vast supporter of immigration, not only to Kansas, but to the entirety of the United States, because I know firsthand what immigration can do. I, myself, am the son of an immigrant. My mother comes from Mexico. So when I hear about the Dreamers and the fear they have to go through about deportation, I know what that's like. Not necessarily myself, but family members that I had. Phone calls that were made to family members that said, "Are you okay? Where are you right now?" I know what that's like firsthand. And when you say you want to deport Dreamers, you're saying you want to break apart families and you want to destroy lives. And I'm going to try not to say anything about the president, because if I do, I'll probably end up on a federal watch list. So we have to understand that immigrants build this country. And my vision for Kansas in that regard is one of a welcoming place. Seldom is heard a discouraging word. You guys know the song. And I say, come to Kansas, let's build it up together, because more population means more services will be needed. That's opportunity. Bigger population centers, more people, and I hope in the future they'll be granted paths to true citizenship, because that's what they deserve. Because you wouldn't be able to tell them from your neighbors if they didn't tell you, or you didn't know from experience. Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me say, I served during the time, my tenure as mayor, I served on the committee for the Obama administration on the immigration reform. And I met with the president, and I met with various different mayors across the entire state. In fact, I was the one that got over 30 mayors in the state of Kansas to sign off in telling the Obama administration to be careful with whatever it was that they were doing, so that they did not have any unintended consequences or affect our families or our communities, or create an environment where we had to spend money to address that particular issue in each one of the communities. And so we ended up coming together and working and being representative and coming up with something that would be able to do that. And we encourage individuals to be here in the state of Kansas and to come to the state of Kansas. We're welcoming a warm state itself, but doing that, making sure that we did not affect our industries. And we clearly understand the industry and the economics of what would happen here in western Kansas in the agriculture, and whether it be meat packing in those particular areas there, if the president applied what they were actually doing. Because I've seen what actually happened, and I lived in the large city in the state of Kansas, You've seen families move. You've seen individuals migrating, going different places. States have said that there were penalties if you hired someone. They had no idea that the entire family would move. So you had industries, whether it be streets or whether it be building, all of those, they were lacking. I served on the board of directors for the National League of Cities and had mayors complaining to me about the problems that they were having in building new homes and construction. So it does have an economic impact, and it has a big shift in moving things away, and families do stick together, and I certainly encourage them to do that. The thing is, we have to be extremely careful, and we have to respect the fact that we do not want to send Americans to another country, and this is the only thing that they do know. So we must be patient and embrace our differences and be able to work closer together.
Well, certainly this is a federal issue primarily, but the fact of the matter is that immigration certainly is an issue forever. And my grandfather never got to the second grade because he didn't speak English. And so I understand the issues that we have, and we are an immigrant country. And to think that we can deport whatever number of million people it is, practically and financially, is foolishness. It cannot be done, and all we do is recreate more strife and more dissension within already uncertain communities throughout the United States. I think we need to have something like a purple card, where these people that are here, give them a purple card which gives them legal status. I didn't say legal citizenship, not yet, but at least give them legal status so that they can feel comfortable and protected and know that, okay, we're not going to get deported. Obviously, we need to get rid of criminals. We need to get rid of people who committed murder and those kinds of things. That goes without saying. But to think that we can just deport people is ludicrous, and it only creates more bad feelings. And we already have dissension in our country, in our legislatures in every state, and that only creates more. We need to get on and really solve some of these other issues of finance, of healthcare, of safety, and so on. And I think there's a quick fix. Let's get a purple card, and then let's go on with that. Jack?
I believe it is a shame that the Congress could not get together and decide on a decision on a DACA. And I believe it is a shame that these people have to live in fear when they are Americans, but that they live in fear of being sent to a country they do not know. But also, on top of just the DACA, I believe if you are an immigrant and you've lived here for long enough and you haven't committed any crime, you should be given status similar to DACA, where you won't be deported and you can live here freely. Because these people are coming out of extreme poverty, and they're only coming here to make a better life for themselves and their families. They're not coming here to harm people. Of course, if you do come here and you do commit a crime, you need to be deported. But I think we need to overlook, the stereotypes, and we need to really just get down to most of these people, overwhelming majority of people that are great people that do care, and we're a country of immigrants, and we can't just stop being a country of immigrants. If we stop that, we'll stop being the foundation of America. Is gone. So I think we need to make sure that all immigrants that are here and that are making America a better place are protected and can continue to make America a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Our fourth question goes specifically to Mr. Savati. And when Josh is done, Robert Klingberg will answer next. We come back to Carl. Okay. Josh, the question is this: groundwater is critical, irrigation is depleting it rapidly. The question: what are your thoughts about limiting the usage of irrigation in western Kansas?
So I served as Ag Secretary during the Parkinson administration. This was a big policy item of mine when I was Ag Secretary. It was when I was in the legislature as well, and continues to be. There are some exciting and forward-thinking practices happening, particularly here in Northwest Kansas. The Lima and Sheridan County is a good thing. That's where it's a local enhanced management area. Everyone gets together and decides collectively to reduce their water consumption. But it's probably not fast enough. And I think especially in Southwest Kansas, where the agriculture is a little more intense even, and the packing industry is centered there, we're going to have to think hard. about how we make sure that Garden City, Dodge City, and Liberal are vibrant economies, not just 10 years from now, but 50 or 100 years from now. The state actually has the authority to do those things right now. It doesn't need new legislation. It can do things through the chief engineer. But I think in order for them to be adopted, they certainly need to be practices that are talked through with local producers. And oftentimes when you work with local producers, they can come up with some good ideas as well. But there is a sweet spot of profitability in the amount of water you put on a field of corn. And right now, most producers in southwest Kansas are actually overproducing beyond that sweet spot of profitability. And some of it is because of crop insurance, some of it's demands that our lenders are putting onto their operations. But I think the state needs to engage producers in a conversation of where profitability really lies. And also discuss with them less thirsty crops that may be able to meet close to the same economic levels that their current production is. It's not going to be perfect, but again, it's incumbent upon us, the state, to be focused on long-term issues, and I think this is one of those that's sitting out there, and I, as the governor, would certainly be fully focused on.
Water is a finite resource. It can be replenished. You know, the ocean is salt water, but fresh water is what we're really concerned about. Kansas and western Kansas specifically, I do believe is supplied mostly through the aquifers that are under the ground. And I do believe that implementing responsible farming practices everywhere possible is probably the best course of action. But then we can also get a little bit creative. We can start to look at changing the landscape in order to help these natural water reserves replenish themselves. I've seen a few different papers that I've read on planting artificial forests. So potentially, and you might think to yourself first, how would planting large consumers of water create more water? And it's through the natural processes that release the water vapor, and then it joins with the rest of the water vapor in the air and comes back down as rain. That can help limit irrigation because more rain, less water you need to pump out of the ground. There are definitely ways that we can come up, and one thing I would do for sure is putting together a team and utilizing state resources to look at that and see what we can do efficiently that wouldn't put too much burden on the farmers who are dependent on it. Thank you. Paul?
Water is a very important commodity that we have here in the state of Kansas, and I served at one point in time on the Water Authority Committee when we first started having droughts here in the state of Kansas, and the conversation was, how much water we were actually pulling from the aquifers and where were we going to get water from, and we had to come up with a lot of innovative ways of being able to preserve water. We come up with a lot of great ideas of being able to change the types of crops that we actually provide. And certainly we need to look at doing some hybrid types of crops. And here in the state of Kansas, there are some that don't require as much water. But then secondly, taking it a step farther as to how we actually utilize water and give it an importance. If you take southeastern Kansas and eastern Kansas, water, there are many communities there that don't have water. In fact, for their cattle and things of that nature, for agriculture, they have to truck it in. Create an environment where they can actually use gray water or storm water. And I know that we have already did that. Our regular potable water is water that's not used, it's only used for human consumption. And the other water is reprocessed, and we use it for manufacturing or doing various different things of that nature instead of using the water that we use for the water. So coming up with different ways and trying to do it in a smarter way. Not only that, but we actually found ways where we sold hundreds of millions of gallons of water to manufacturing companies, but then was able to sell it to them at a cheaper rate than what the regular going rate was that we were actually selling it for. So one, we were actually able to recapture some of the water, but then secondly, we saved money and we made money. The water that we were disposing of or putting it into the ground or dumping it into the river, we were able to recapture that. So that's one of the things that we can actually do, but water is very important and we need to treat it as if it's one of the most prized commodities that we actually have.
Pardon?
Water is actually the most prized commodity we have because internationally it is predicted to be the #1 trigger for war in the future. Not oil, water. And I have a significant background in southwestern United States agriculture as well as arid agriculture around the world. I've consulted on well over 1 million acres. And the issue is twofold. One, yes, you can control the amount of water that's being used, but the reality is over the last 60 to 70 years, we've lost over 50% of our topsoil in this country. We have lost over 50% of the carbon. The real issue in the soil is not how much water you dump on it. The real issue is what is your carbon sequestration rate, or reverse that. How much carbon do you actually have in the soil? Because that correlates to water holding capacity. That is a farm management issue. That is what I have taught for the last 30 years on 3 continents and 13 countries. And I've written about it, and I know exactly what to do. The New Zealanders this year proved with 10 years of data that we can sequester easily 5% carbon per year with appropriate farm management. That's only 1.2 tons of carbon per acre in Kansas. We do that in more difficult soils than Kansas, more dry areas around the world. South Africa, Western Australia, Mexico, drier climates than here. This is about farm management. This is about soil management. And then, yes, now we actually can talk about how much water do we actually manage. Arizona has been having to do that in California for a lot longer than Kansas has thought about it. We already have the models in order to solve this problem. It's a matter of having a governor who actually knows how to do that and then becomes the advocate for that to happen.
Jack?
I'm going to be real short. You know, this is an issue I'm going to admit I haven't thought a lot about and I don't know a lot about. I do have it written down here in my notepad that I'm going to do more research on this issue because I can tell it's very important and we have to make sure we have enough water for our farms and for our communities. So I'm just going to leave it at that because I don't want to give you guys a bunch of stuff that, you know, would just be spewing, okay?
Thank you, Jack. Jim?
Thank you, Jack. That's rare. That was good. Thank you. This is an area that I agree with Governor Brownback, and that doesn't happen very often. But I thought he was right to put water front and center and make it a priority and talk about a 50-year plan. Now, I think it should be a little shorter than that because 50 years is a long way away. I think because of that, our Department of Health and Environment is doing some things right now in areas where water in western Kansas. First thing is education. There's a lot of new creative ways to farm, and farmers and ranchers, the 62,000 people in Kansas who make their living farming and ranching are on the front lines of doing that, and the Department of Health and Environment is a part of it. It's trying to get cost-effective technology that helps us use water better and at a more timely during the day. That requires high-speed internet, and we should have that across this state everywhere. It shouldn't just be a province of the urban areas because we have dense population. It is the same issue, high-speed internet, as it was 100 years ago for electricity. We've got to get it everywhere, and this is an area that can help. And finally, it's partnerships. Josh mentioned the LEMAs. That's local water owners working together on a way to save water. I'm happy that we finally eliminated the policy that said use it or lose it. The idea that you could bank your water when you didn't use it, otherwise you could use it for another year. Those are the kinds of things that I will continue to push as governor. And the last thing I'll say, it's not just a rural problem. A few years ago during that drought, we were having significant problems in Wichita with water consumption or water availability. Our primary source of Cheney Lake was down a significant amount. But urban areas are also being created. You look at Johnson County, who's partnering in one of our largest counties, big urban center. They're partnering, that's Water District number 1, with Milford Lake for long-term water supply. We all have a stake in this, and as governor, we promote that partnership.
I too would applaud the emphasis that the governor has put on water issues in the state, the development of that 50-year plan. I agree with Representative Ward that 50 years is a long time. Probably ought to shrink it down just a tad. But I think behind all of that and all the good things that are happening in Kansas Health and Environment Department, we have to remember that we have defunded the Kansas Water Office for many years. You know, I was talking before about all of the piggy banks that we had robbed, and we have done that. So at the same time, you have all this talk, it sounds good, about a 50-year water plan. You have the money that might be used to promote something like that being swept in to balance our budget. So I think what we need is to continue to bring together the minds in the state and out of the state who understand what those issues are and can come up with a master plan and a resolution. And then I think we have to put our money where our mouth is.
Thank you. Question number 5, I will direct first to Senator Laura Kelly, and then Mr. Savati will answer, and of course Mr. Klingenberg. The question comes from a member of the Colby community, and it's quite simple. Senator Kelly, Laura, what is your position on women's reproductive rights?
Isn't it ironic that that question would come first to a woman? I have been an ardent supporter of women's rights, period, for all of my life. When I was a kid, I was a bit of a tomboy, and I wanted nothing more than to replace Mickey Mantle in center field for the New York Yankees. I wasn't allowed to do that. Probably wouldn't have been talented enough anyway, but just my gender prevented that from ever being a possibility. I was raised before Title IX and before women's sports became more equal on our campuses across the state. So when I look at women's reproductive rights or any rights that they have, I believe that all people should be created equal, whether they're women or men, regardless of their racial makeup, their ethnic makeup, their religious preference, their sexual orientation. I just believe that all people are created equal, and we ought to be treating them equal. And I would add to that as a tag that I firmly support equal pay for equal work.
Josh?
To the question of equal rights, I absolutely agree that everyone is created equal, and the state has an obligation to treat everyone that way. To the question of reproductive rights, I have said on a number of occasions that I would veto any new restriction on women's reproductive rights. Now, some people say that's different than when I served in the State House. I voted pro-life when I was in the State House. I represented a very rural district, and that was an important thing for my constituents. And I do think that it's important for the Democratic Party to be cognizant of that conversation across the state. There are a lot of people that feel strongly about this on both sides, and I think that it's important for us to be able to be respectful of both sides. But I have told people, as governor, you balance a broader constituency, and we certainly, as a state, should not be wasting taxpayer dollars fighting legislation that is clearly unconstitutional, the bulk of which this state can pass anymore is really unconstitutional. And so that's where I am on reproductive rights, but certainly on rights, LGBT rights, everything else. It is important for us as a state to be open and to be fair and to be equal. And I think now more than ever, everyone is watching, both here in the state of Kansas, but in this country. And I think it's a moment, and we want to make sure that as leaders, we are stepping forward to make sure that we are clearly demonstrating that we can govern in a way that is equal and fair for everyone.
Robert?
I do support women's rights to the reproductive health care that they need. From a personal level, I know people who've had to visit women's clinics, so to speak. I know people, and I know what their feelings were after everything was said and done. When people tell me they are pro-life, they're really telling me they're pro-forced birth. They're not really concerned with what happens after the fact. And an organization such as, say, Planned Parenthood should be able to function in the capacity it was meant to give people an option to plan their families. Raising a child is expensive. I have 2 of my own. They cost a lot. And nobody should be able to tell anybody what they can or cannot do. And I think we're all probably going to agree, we all probably believe in true equality. I believe all people are people and have the right to make the decisions that they need to make in order to be comfortable and be happy in their lives. Thank you.
Carl?
I'm pro-choice, without a doubt. I've got 13 grandchildren, half of them are females. And I believe that it's important. I believe that it is important that any female should have the say, the right, any type of services that might be there, or any type of say that has to do with her body. The exact same way as any male might have the same right that he has for his body. When you start taking away individuals' rights, you're opening the door for individuals to take away other rights. And that door should never, ever be opened. So you're going to have to provide health care one way or another. So why not be able to help individuals on the front end rather than on the back end?
Pardon?
As my website says, I'm circumstantially pro-life and circumstantially pro-choice. It's not really a black and white issue. I know a lot of people who are not physicians, who don't deal with the poor, who don't deal with drug babies, who don't deal with birth defects, rapes, and those kinds of things want to make it a black and white issue. It is not. At 24 weeks and above, okay, I'm pro-life. Less than that, I'm pro-choice. Because women know by the time at 24 weeks, generally, and actually by the time they're done with that first trimester, they pretty well know whether or not this is going to be appropriate. I had a young lady in my practice, she's mentally retarded significantly. She's in a home, she was raped, became pregnant. The guy threatened to kill her if she said anything. So mom didn't find out. Mom came and visited her at the home. She was a little bit overweight. Didn't find out that this child, she's 26, was pregnant until mid-late that second trimester. And she had an abortion. She had a termination. So those circumstances are not black and white, even though a lot of people like to believe that they are. We're going to pay for them one way or the other. And the whole birth defect issue, don't tell me that's God. Because of the chemicals and products that man put into the environment that caused those birth defects, that wasn't God that invented those. But a lot of people want to make that black and white. It's not. I wish it were that easy. I make life and death decisions every day, and I wish they were easy like that. But they're not. And I got a couple seconds left. One other thing I'd like to do, because I've got seconds, that issue of water, that 50-year plan, that's an excuse for not taking care of what we can take care of today. 5 years, we can turn that system around, water in the soil, get the carbon back into the soil.
Thank you, Lord. Jack?
I think it's vital that we make sure that women have every right, equality in the workplace, equality in society, and equality to do what they want to do with their bodies. On the issue of abortion, I am pro-choice on the issue, but I do have people want to talk about. Although I'm pro-choice and the woman has the right to make that decision, I want to make it so abortions are less common because I think especially in cases when the baby will be healthy, I would like to make the adoption system much easier so that when unwanted babies are born, it is much easier for families to adopt, maybe look at lowering adoption fees, stuff like that, so more families can adopt, and so that we have fewer abortions. And I think that's would be one of the biggest policies I support on that issue. Thank you.
Jim?
Thank you. I support a woman's right to make medical decisions, including her reproductive rights. I've voted that way my entire career. In fact, one of the first votes I had, Carl, on the city council was when someone tried to pass an ordinance that would prohibit medical care for reproductive services in Wichita. My record's clear. I also have voted for equal pay for equal work. And Lord help, I have 2 children. They're 15 months apart, a boy and a girl. Lord help the person that tells my daughter that she can't pursue her God-given talents because she's a girl.
We've had 37 questions that have come in. We've only done 5. I know it's 4:30, but I want this one last question, which is appropriate to end our festivities today. The question really is for Mr. Swati first. Mr. Klingberg will answer second. Of course, we come back to Carl. The question is this. It's quite simple. What is the most pressing issue facing Kansas today. What is number one, Josh, in your mind, and what role do you see as governor in addressing those issues? This issue.
I think you could say, the fiscal situation of the state, the overall picture the state is in, but I think this election, and this is a primary, folks. The Democratic Party's not had a primary in a long time, and this is a large field. And I think one of the reasons there's so much interest is that everyone realizes this is a watershed moment for the state. And I think the number one issue for the state, really, is what sort of image do we create for ourselves, not only within the state of Kansas, but outside of it? Because all of the economic development and the tax incentives that we try to do as a state can only work if people and businesses around the rest of the country have a sense that Kansas is headed in the right direction. Because right now they don't. And even within our state, I think they don't. And that's why this election is so important. It is about the future of the state of Kansas. And quite honestly, I think Jack Ferguson probably represents the future best among this panel up here, since he's the youngest. But in terms of a candidate that is going to campaign statewide and create a new image for the state of Kansas, I think that's what will be the critical element in 2018 as we move into this campaign cycle. Kansas must turn the page on the last 7 years. And we must demonstrate to ourselves that we can govern again, and to the rest of the country that we are open for business, and that we are a state headed in the right direction. And part of that's going to be the state government functioning better again and building a coalition, but part of that is simply going to be a fresh face. And it has to be a fresh face that can actually win the race. And I would humbly suggest that I am in the best position to do that.
Thank you, Robert.
I think the issue that's most pressing right now, and I don't think it really gets a lot of attention, is the overall state's attitude in preparing for the future. A lot of people live in the now, and that's understandable, because right now is what's affecting you the most. But there are a lot of things coming, not just for Kansas, but for the future, that I think we should really be taking a lot of time to examine. Things that are prevalent, that are already coming into play, such as automation. There is really not one job that can't be replaced, that you cannot be replaced by a machine. It's coming. Driverless cars are going to be here before you know it. And transportation is is the largest employment sector in the United States. What are we going to do when all these people who drive for a living no longer drive? Who's the insurance company going to want to insure? The driver who can fall asleep, who has to take mandated 10-hour breaks? I say that because I myself am a truck driver. I do drive a truck for a living, as well as sales, and we have to have 10 hours off per shift. But a truck that can run 24 hours autonomously, that's cost effective. So we need to really begin looking at the way that automation is going to impact our economy. A lot of talk is thrown about raising minimum wage. I myself do support a minimum wage increase. But were you to raise it too high, that's how you get automated kiosks at all your stores. Walmart is the largest private employer in the country, in Kansas, and they've already come out and said at some point in the future we want cashierless stores. Amazon is testing brick and mortar stores that charge you when you leave with what you have on you. No cashiers, drone stocking. These are things that we should really take time to examine and how they're going to impact us.
Thank you. Carl, the pressing issues right now.
Well, certainly the pressing issue that we have now is, one, we've got to create an environment that reflects who we as Kansans are. And I believe that we're good, wholesome people. I've lived my entire life here. We're good, wholesome people, hardworking people, people that want a better life, want our children and our families to grow up and live in the same communities that we have. We would like for them to have the same professions that we have. Certainly, many of them have different interests, but we want them to stay here. We have to change our image as Kansans worldwide. So we're going to have to start sending out a different message than the one that has been sent out there, where everyone, when you start talking about Kansas, people start laughing at us and talking about Kansas. Why would I go there? Or why would I want to move my business there? We need to diversify what we actually have as a state. We know that we're big into agriculture, we know we're big into manufacturing, we're big into medical, but what other new opportunities are out there for our children and for the future? Let's start thinking outside the box rather than inside the box and bring that into our communities. That's what's going to attract new businesses, change us, diversify us, and make us better than what we are today. We're great as it is, but I believe that we can be greater. As I said, I've lived my entire life here. I've seen us during our good times, I've seen us in our bad times, and I've really seen the times that we have going on now. And I know that Kansans are better than what our representatives have shown the rest of the country and the rest of the world that we are. So to do that, it's going to require all of us to come together. And to come together, this is an opportunity. This is a moment. We have to go to the polls. We don't have a choice. Unless we want more of what we're already getting, and unless we want Colby, we had better go to the polls and send a strong message to everyone else.
Thank you, Carl. Arden?
The economy. I think it always is, always has been, the most important issue, the economy. Because regardless of whether we want to talk about healthcare or agriculture, whatever it is, education, public service, if the economy is taken care of, we have revenue to do some of those things. If the economy is good, people have a good attitude about taking care of business. If people have a good economy, they're more comfortable. So the economy always is one of the most important issues. To get that good economy, we have to address some of the problems that we have in Kansas. One, with making a state that is attractive to businesses, as many of my colleagues here have said. Education, of course, then is one of the most important things for that. Taxation, how we set up the tax laws, is also very important for that. But it's interesting, if you look at some of the biggest industries around the world, taxes really don't determine whether a business comes here. You look at California, you look at Washington State, you look at New York. Some of those states have much higher tax rates than we do, but they also have bigger businesses and more businesses. So it's not just the taxes. It's about education, it's about a workforce and having that attraction for businesses and people to come here. Yes, we have to address healthcare. That's going to be a key issue in helping to support whatever economy we have and making it satisfactory for businesses to come here and to stay here. In addition to that, we have to address public safety issues, crime, prison systems. Healthcare also includes mental health care. And if the economy is good, guess what? We have easily the revenue to address those things. So we still have to focus on the economy. In doing so, we then will address many of the other issues.
Thank you, Jack.
I'm going to talk about an issue that it's going to be an issue even before the next governor takes office, and that is voter engagement. And that's one of the reasons that I first got motivated in the race. And when I'm like, I see, a lot of people, they don't know, especially younger people, but even people just across the board, they don't know who their state reps are. They don't even know who necessarily the congressman is. And I think that's depressing because if you don't, if you're not engaged and you don't know who represents you and you don't know what the parties believe on a fundamental level or on certain issues, you're not going to be engaged. And people don't care because for so long politics has just been all bickering and it hasn't been about solving problems. And we need to elect people who care about solving issues, and that's why I got in the race to point out this issue of voter engagement, and I think it's crucial. We need to make sure younger people, they understand that there's crucial stakes in this election in 2020, 2022, 2024. It's going to be an issue forever. We got to make sure that we are policy driven and that we are addressing the issues of not just today but tomorrow. Otherwise, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party will cease to exist because people will find something that will fix their problem, and we need to make sure everything is working for everyone and for the future. Also, I will briefly touch on the issue of the minimum wage because I do believe it needs to be raised, and I am supportive of the 5-15 movement. I believe we need a $15 minimum wage to ensure no one working 40 hours a week goes hungry or lives in poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Jim?
Jobs. Good jobs that provide income that you can raise a family and live in comfort. And that requires a governor who's fully engaged in economic vitality. And I go across this state and I talk to business owners and they are looking for qualified employees. I talk to kids and they're looking for good jobs. I believe a fully engaged governor who wants to be governor can be that bridge. I want to engage businesses in how we structure education so that we get graduates who can go to work on day one and are adaptable to the quick changing world we live in. I don't want them to dictate how we teach kids, but to talk about what they're seeing when they're hiring our graduates and how we can improve that product so that they want to stay in Kansas. We sit here in Colby, Kansas, where the commodity market's been sluggish for the last 10 years. Agriculture's 40% of our economy, 13% of our workforce. We need a governor fully engaged in partnering with the agriculture community to promote policies. It is absolutely wrong that we would put barriers in front of our agriculture community and trade so they can't sell the best products in the world everywhere. And as your governor, I will advocate for trade policies that allow agricultural produce to get sold all over the world, and the goal being we get a fair deal, because I have no doubt that our commodities can compete with anyone's. We just need to get the federal government out of the way, and I will be that voice.
Thank you, Jim. Laura, you have the final last word.
I think it's hard to disagree that the economy is our ultimate goal. Growing the economy is our ultimate goal. But I think the most pressing issue right now, and what got us into this state, is fiscal sanity and fiscal stabilization. You know, over the past 7 years, we have lived in a place where we have not managed our money well. We have borrowed too much. We have gone deeply in debt. And until we reverse that trend and take it back to where we can generate enough revenue to pay our bills, it's going to be difficult to attract businesses. They're going to be looking at the fact that we have cut our budget 9 times in the last few years to the point where our government agencies are not able to provide the support services that new businesses need. We have downgraded our state credit rating, Moody's has, 3 times in the last few years. Companies look at those kinds of things when they're making decisions about where to move. So we have got to address our budget issues. We have got to stabilize them, and we've got to get back on the right path before we're going to be able to do the things that we really do need to do, which is to attract businesses. We look at our higher education system, which we have underfunded, and when I think of the higher education system, I'm thinking both of our 4-year universities, but I'm also thinking of our technical and community colleges, where so much of the training that our businesses need occurs. We have underfunded them many times over the past few years. That's another investment that we have to make in order to be able to attract and retain businesses. And until we establish fiscal sanity and stabilization in the state, we won't be able to do that.
The Thomas County Democrats, Colby Community College, Northwestern Kansas want to thank the 7 candidates for coming here. Would you